Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you, and I want to remind you this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. If you have issues, does not constitute working with a licensed mental health professional, then please seek one out in your area to work on your issues. So, if you listen to the way we ended the last year with Wakanda Forever, we're back again for talking about Across the Spider-Verse. And I brought back in once more one of my fellow Blerds in the process, Mercedes Samudio. And just a reminder for those of you who haven't listened to the other episodes with him, Mercedes Samudio is a licensed clinical social worker, best-selling author, international speaker, and visionary entrepreneur. She works with parents around the world in developing a healthy parental identity with her revolutionary parental identity development model and incorporating her shame-proof parenting philosophy to help reduce the shame parents experience as they raise healthy children. Mercedes is also trained in trauma-informed modalities, which she uses in her work with parents to help them heal the past traumas that can influence the way parents interact with their children and themselves. Outside of her personal life, she supports her parents. Mercedes is married to her best friend and soulmate, and they live in sunny Southern California with their 3 furry kids, 2 cats, and a dog. Which, if you'd like to learn more about her work, check out shameproofparenting.com. So, welcome back, Mercedes.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back. I love talking about nerd stuff here with you. It's so fun.
Definitely. And we're going to talk about the new Spider-Man movie, Across the Spider-Verse, which is one of the Miles Morales ones, as opposed to the Peter Parker ones, which we also know there's another one of those coming up soon, which finally I think fixes the aspect of the Venom universe. But that's entirely different other ball of wax to go into. And I'm sure also to all the others out there, we probably should have had this out earlier in the month, but, work schedules and all of that, we're going to have it out here at the beginning of July. So.
But that works because it gives people time to watch it so we don't spoil anything. We can kind of talk about it a little more openly. It kind of works.
Oh, very much so. So I got a chance to see it last week. How about for you?
I think I saw it, if not opening weekend, probably a couple of days afterwards for sure.
Nice. So let's get into it. What are your thoughts about this latest installment of Miles' journey as a Spider-Man, or Spider-Person, I should say?
Yeah, I'd say overall, I was in love with it. I thought it was amazing. I went into it, number one, I didn't go back and watch the first one because I remembered it. I've seen the first one so many times. And I was like, I just don't want to go into this one as is. And I'm really happy that I did that because it allowed me to really just experience this one as its own movie, even though I know it's the continuation. I'm I could just experience it as its own separate movie. I didn't even know that it was going to end on a cliffhanger. So even that made me even more invested in kind of what was happening. And so I'd say overall, if we're doing thumbs up, stars, I'm 2 thumbs up, 5 out of 5 stars. I think it is exactly what everyone keeps saying about it. It's a really amazing entry into this franchise, but just a great Spider-Man movie in general. Oh, just sticking with all the tropes. I know when I first started watching, it's wait a minute, why are we hearing so much from Gwen? And then we moved to Miles. But I mean, she was also one of the central characters and very much loved how she decorated her bedroom as well. But there was also that significance to it. But I think one of the biggest things that I did notice as a theme that was started to be suggested in the first movie, but it was very much carried over here, is how many of the Spider-Persons, I'm going to use that more generically, feel alone in their universes. Yeah, that's a very salient theme, isn't it? In the spider lore, if you will, Spider-Man lore, this idea that I'm by myself or that no one understands the types of decisions or the weight of my decisions or the weight of my responsibility, right? I think you're right about that. Like, it is very much like a theme for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, that comes up very, very much as we start hearing Gwen's story. And then and with something that was even being mentioned by the other universe, Peter, when he first realizes Miles is there and they're vibing off of each other, to what we start seeing with all the various spider persons in their headquarters in 2099.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was something that's really interesting too, that you're bringing up, that like out of all of them, there's this central theme of I'm alone and no one understands me. Even when they get into this headquarters, they're all very like, I'm alone, I'm by myself. Like that one who was sitting there in the therapy who was like, man, like, I just feel like it's all me. He's sitting there with another Spider-Man, and then like all these other ones jump through, and you're like, y'all.
Yeah.
There's like a theme here.
Which also then just brings the fact that we've got a spider therapist here.
Spider-Man therapist, exactly. Who's helping him process Uncle Ben's death, I think, by the way. So, like, I think you all kind of have an issue here, and it's kind of funny how it all coalesces into this story of, well, we're all alone except for we're not, interestingly enough. And that's something that I feel like happened in the first movie, where like they were all together, but very separate, but coming together at the end to realize like they actually do like Miles. Miles is really a part of them. And then kind of this movie doing the exact same thing where they leave Miles out again and he has to prove, wow, that's something I just realized, he has to prove again, no, I'm part of this whole spider thing. And what just light bulb for me was that he is the the only Black Spider-Man that in the first one had to really prove hello, and then in the second one had to prove hello again. I would like to be a part of the Spider-Man verse thing that you're doing here, the Spider People thing here, right? And so it's just an interesting light bulb that just came up as I was talking.
Which, especially considering that there is both Spider Bite and Jessica, a Black version of Jessica Drew, aka Spider Woman, as well.
Thank you. I'm all over here like, okay, in the first one, he was by himself. You're right. This one, he has two other folks. Thank you. Thank you.
And then, of course, Hobie Brown, Spider Punk.
I'm going to leave him over here for a minute because he deserves his own part of this conversation.
Oh, definitely.
I will rectify when I said the only Black one. I meant like in that first one, he like, introduced as that. Sorry, I just want to clarify for recording purposes.
Yeah, fully agree with you. Which is also one of the things too with what we're seeing in the second one is, even though the shit's going down with this whole aspect of their universes connected, it is on some level the Black characters that are supporting Miles much more so than any of the others.
Fair.
Even if they can't do it openly.
Fair.
They're doing it covertly.
Huh. I love that.
Spider Bite could have triggered the shutdown, but in looking in that eyes and that understanding, she hesitated.
Yes. And even Jessica Drew kind of did it through Gwen. She like helped through Gwen. Right. Very
much so. And this was something that was also something that was pointed out by another podcaster talking about the aspect of these were those Black characters, other spider persons who offered, even though it was sometimes very covert aid, they offered the aid that wasn't being offered by the rest of the identifying Spider-Man.
And when you think about this kind of idea, and this is something that I kind of appreciate, I'll bring Hobie in. He's super against this whole establishment, super against whatever this is that they're trying to do. Like, and I kind of appreciate you bringing this in, because then you have these different ideologies that I think also, when we're talking about representation, that's something that I love. So you got this punk rock guy who's like really cool and really badass and is like, screw the establishment, right? And he's this Black guy, right? But then like you said, you have Spider-Bite that's techie, right? Very techie girl, kind of her whole universe is very tech and computer, right? And then you've got Spider-Woman, right? Jessica Drew, who's like a whole adult, like she's got a family and she's out here doing her job and this is her job and she goes back to her reality. And so then you have Miles, who is this young man, right? He's like this young adult trying to figure out his life. And so I just really actually appreciated having all of this representation, right? Where a lot of times Black characters tend to get troped, right? Or othered, right? But these characters are all so full and vibrant. And I don't mean that because the way they're drawn, I mean the actual personalities and their motivations and what they're doing, even with what you're sharing about the covert help, right? About Hobie actually giving them the
bracelet,
band, right? So they can go back and save him, right? And connect with him. And then, Jessica kind of continuing to help Gwen pull Miles in because she's asking, right? Even those covert things, I think, kind of go into some of these ideas about what it means to be Black or African American in the world, and how sometimes even amongst all of this, we're not able to show up as vibrantly. But this movie, we are like in this representation, we are really vibrant, right, and really three-dimensional and really aware of our own motivations and our own feelings. And so I just kind of appreciate that this continues to happen in our creative spaces. Pop culture spaces,
this is also one of the ones that we get to hear, even with what his mom says before he goes after Gwen. That's not a message that you usually get to hear in any of the other variety, not even talking about some geekdom movies of talking about Black parenthood or Latin or Afro diasporic parenthood.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that too. Their relationships are really healthy, right? And I don't mean perfect. I don't mean good. They're just healthy, right? And watching them try to figure out how do we hold on to our young man who is obviously growing up and like living his whole life, right? Even I love the retirement scene, how vulnerable his parents are, right? And trying to figure out how do we manage this young man, right? How do we hold him, right? I just love the vulnerability in these parents. I love the vulnerability in this, Black dad, right? This Latina mom who, again, those stereotypes tend to be different, right? And so to see that softness, to see those three-dimensional parents try to figure out, we're not just going to, they yell because they're human and they're concerned, but to even watch them go through, well, maybe we shouldn't have yelled and that wasn't the right way to deal with that. And to watch them manage that is healthy, right? It's that healthy family dynamic that you're right, we don't often see.
Well, and to that same then is the aspect of the two of them having a parenting discussion.
Yeah. Agreed.
And it's not just like one of them is setting the rules and the other one's got to follow. It's like, no, they're actually having a discussion about what it is and taking also the other's issue when, someone took them off grounding.
Yes.
But I think,
exactly.
Too, to that standpoint, is also the beauty of the conversation that Miles and his father have, even though his father doesn't realize he's talking to his son, he knows he's talking to Spider-Man.
Yeah. And I love that Miles has his dad. Not only does the Peters don't have their dad, they don't have their uncle either. So a lot of these Peters grow up kind of figuring out what it means to be a man or be, what that means to them, right? And then you have this Miles who not only has his dad, gets to have these type of moments, right? Again, like he, his dad has no idea, but he gets to have this moment of, man, ease up on your son and, he's doing his best, and I kind of appreciate it. Because I think, again, when we go back to representation, healthy portrayals that we're not pointing out, we're just watching a father and a son. But to know that it's a Black father and his Afro-Latino son, or a Latinx son, it's like, this is something that people don't just see. It's not just commonplace. It's not just something that people are used to, right? It dispels and kind of gives some weight to some of the stereotypes of, this is just how Black dads are. This is just how young Black boys are. And it's like, well, here's another image for you. to put in with all of that other kind of junk and stuff that you continue to recycle. Here's another image for you. And so I love those scenes when that gets to happen in this movie, because it just shows another image for you. Here's something else to think about. Here's another way to see this relationship or this dynamic, you know?
Very much so. There's also an interesting aspect too in looking at, again, by this point you've probably all seen the movie, dealing with the aspect of what was brought up about this canon event. And what does it mean, especially in that relation of, okay, it was not an Uncle Ben, it was Uncle Aaron that died in this universe. Although let's segue for a moment from that over to talking about one of the other major characters in this, which was Miguel O'Hare, who is bringing very much our Latin Spider-Man. Not to mention we also have our Indian Spider-Man. Loved him.
It's great. He's great. Traffic. This is my traffic. This is my traffic. Here's also traffic. Exactly. But not because I've been there, but because I'm like, I understand. Like if you were here, you'd be like, here's my traffic. Also, here's our traffic. You know, very relatable.
Yeah. But also that aspect of here is also a full Latin representation, or shall we say the Latin Euro, comes into with the last name I like O'Hara, but also the massive amount of guilt he's walking around with. And clearly not sitting down with spider therapist.
Right. Staying away from spider therapists, obviously. And I love these two ideas that are being introduced into just like the narrative, because I think there is, and I'm just being nerd here. If you think about like Flashpoint, the whole idea of Flash and Flashpoint is like, if I go back and change this canon event, then I'll come back and everything will be nice. And it's like, doesn't happen. That's not how it works. And so I think this is what Miguel is talking about, right? This is what Miguel is trying to say. Like, I agree. This is horrible. This canon event sucks. But it's also, it changes the fabric of everything, not just you and your partner, or you and your parent, or you and your child. It changes the fabric of everything. And so then you have this character that did that. Miguel did that. He went back and changed a whole thing just so he could be a dad and enjoy the idea of being, a dad and having a family. And so think about that one decision and how it changed the whole universe. It changed, the fabric of kind of the spider verse, if you will. And now he's got to deal with that. That's him. Now that's his whole thing.
Which then also brings up just something that, and if you're a geek that has spent any time looking, especially in the multitude of different genres out there that deal with multiple universes, it's like, so what about because of multiverse theory, is that just a different decision happened in a different universe. So what about all these other universes where a spider never got mutated? Why aren't those universes falling apart? Why is it just these universes that have spider people in them? And from the sounds of it, and as we begin to see when we're introduced to the Prowler version of Miles, this universe is stable.
Ish.
Yeah, well, it's stable-ish, but it's not falling apart like Indian Spider-Man universe is something happen. Now, the other thought that also comes to mind here is you did just have a massive super collider powered up in this universe. There's another thing that could be causing this destabilization, not Miles saving who he did.
Right. And now you're bringing in plot holes, right?
Yeah.
I feel like as you were talking, my brain was doing like that meme where it's like all the like equations started happening. Right. Because I actually agree with you on that. When you start like actually pulling apart multiverse theory, actually starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
Right. And I say this as someone who we're kind of diving into like the mental and emotional health of like what this is. If you kind of look at this as decisions and this bigger, like kind of just decision tree, that's kind of how I feel like multiverse stories are. They're very motif-like. They're very like, they're trying to be illustrative, or what's the word I'm looking for? Metaphorical, right? It's metaphorical. Nerdness.
Oh yeah.
But I think that's something that when I'm looking at the Spider-Verse stuff, it's very much like that, where because of this decision, all these other things happen. And then this decision, all these things happen. It's something that I think a lot of times our clients are working through, where what happens to me when I make a decision? There's fear here because on the other side of that decision is a whole labyrinth of other choices. And when I look at, what Miles decides to do, Miles decides to help, right? Because that was his choice. I think about even what Miguel decides to do. Miguel decides to stay and have a family. He knows that this probably isn't the right thing to do, right? It's like all of these choices matter. And so for me, the way that I manage all of that is that the multiverse is full of choices. The ones that are going to mess up the multiverse, as well as the ones that are going to keep it stable. Right. That's how it works. It's a very Tenet-based idea for me, where it's very circular, where Miguel has to do what he did, so that way all of this happens. And then Miles has to do what he does, so all this happens. And then, we haven't even talked about if any of this messes up the actual MCU, because in this movie, they mentioned Doctor Strange and Tom Holland's, Spider-Man and what they do. So it's like, well, does this now have an effect on MCUs? Right. And so for me, it just feels very circular. That I think this is what we teach our clients, that like decisions, they just kind of keep going. There's no like, I've made the decision, we're done. And so in the multiverse, I think the way that we do that metaphorically, if I can bring myself back to a non-tangential idea, is that this multiverse that is being created is very circular to me, that it happens because it has to happen. And this happens because it has to happen. Even as the characters fret about we've messed up, there's this larger idea of, well, you have to mess up in order for the falling action to begin, Did I mind you over enough there for that?
No, but on another level to that, one, of course, we're looking at where they get their sort of canon event idea. But what we're also seeing with what you brought up is the struggle that often happens, especially as we move from kids into teenagers, young adults, is moving away from black and white thinking.
Yes.
Moving into gray thinking, and the realizing that there's a lot more of gray in the universe than it is just purely black and white.
Yes.
And that anxiety you're hitting about the aspect of this spider web of possibilities and choices and outcomes is about that gray thinking, and that aspect of it isn't just yes, no, black, white. I'm the good guy, I'm the bad guy, which is a very poignant thing that he says just before he gets sent off to the universe of 42 is we're supposed to be the good guys. And there's that classic statement, which I know is seen in, I forget which of the Batman, that was a Chris Bale one, where he said, if you live long enough, you go from being the good guy into being the villain of the story, which Miguel has moved from being the good guy in the story to being the villain in his struggle to try and repair what's happened with the multiverse collision, which came from, again, a super collider going off to destabilize the universal walls.
Right. And if you realize it, I think this is something that we're noticing in our narratives now, what you just shared. Going back to representation, back in the day, it was very black and white. Everything was good guy, bad guy, right, wrong, left, right. Even movies, right? My husband and I have been kind of going backwards and watching Alfred Hitchcock stuff. So we watch Dial M for Murder and Strangers on a Train. And those are all very, outside of being color scheme black and white, they also are very black and white. There's a bad guy. There's a good guy. You know this. You know what they're supposed to do. It's very beat for beat. Back then, that was just it, right? But now that black and white thinking actually stops people from being able to critically understand reality, because it's like either you're good or you're bad. Based on what? And so when you look at now, our movies are giving our villains a lot more depth, right? Like you just said with Miguel O'Hara, he's not just a bad guy. He's this guy who literally made a decision. And because of that decision, he's got to now try to rectify it. And so he spends most of his time trying to control everything, right? To rectify his decision and hold his truth, right? Same as Kane, right? Kane, he is trying to hold everything together, right? All the timelines must be together, right? Thanos, Same thing, right? Trauma. I got to make sure that resources don't go away again. What can I do? Snap away half of the universe, right? And so you see now that we've got villains that their motivation isn't just, ha, 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 I'm going to take over the world. But they really have this pain, this trauma that makes them feel like, if I don't control this, something bad's going to happen again. Right. And so I think it's a really interesting motif that we're starting to see. And I love that it's happening even in Spider-Man, Spider-Man across the universe, because kids are watching this, right? Kids are trying to figure out, how do I navigate right and wrong? And you've got characters that are not like, this is right and this is wrong. You've got characters that are struggling with, something bad happened to me. How do I deal with that? Do I get rigid and try to stop it from happening again? Do I go back in time like the Flash and try to save my mom so it never happens? I never have to deal with my family being torn apart. Or do I learn how to manage the fact that this happened to me? My mom was murdered. My dad went to jail for it. And now I've got to live with it. How? Right. So when you look at Flashpoint, it's still going with that narrative, right? I haven't seen it. I won't judge it. I know the actual Flashpoint story. So I'm just going based on the Flashpoint story, not the new movie. But if we look at the Miles Morales kind of story and some of the other villains, these villains and even heroes are having to really sit with their decisions, right? It's not just, I'm the good guy, I made the right decision, or I'm the bad guy, ah, ha, ha, ha. People are like, And so I love your point to just kind of bring it back to, that's why I think it's important that Miles gets to see what happens when someone has another life, right? He sees another version of himself, right? That didn't get to be Spider-Man, that lost a lot.
Yeah, with the loss of his father.
A different life. Yeah, he's living a different life, right?
Yeah, because he's got a different life, an entirely different influence pattern with having Aaron, who was considered the criminal in the family, being that now de facto male lead. And how did that move him to? Even to the standpoint of the differences in his hairstyle, too.
Yeah. Didn't you notice that? That was so funny. We're like, hey, man, you cut your hair. What happened? Where's your hair? And I was trying to figure out,
where's your braids?
Where's your braids? And I'm like, oh, no, I think he's in the wrong universe. I felt that. I was like, this is a different Miles that they're expecting here. And I'm listening to you say that, and I'm like, yeah. So you have this Miles that comes from having a family, that comes from having his dad. He's lost his uncle, but like he's kind of dealt with that a little bit and has kind of moved through some of that grief, right? If you notice, he kind of added his uncle to the mural. I say that word wrong, the mural, and Gwen and stuff. So it's like he's dealt with some of it, not all of it. And then he gets to meet this Miles who lost his dad, and there was nothing he could do about it. He wasn't Spider-Man. He didn't have any powers. He just it had to happen. Right.
And this is a world without a Spider-Man in general. So what, and the circumstances of what caused his father to get killed, and there is also that still the classic thing that even comes back with our villain of the spot of who created who first.
Ooh, I love his origin story, though. I love that he's the guy who got hit with the bagel from the first movie. Like, I just love that. Because I think it goes back to what we just said. There's some things you have no idea that have started a whole trajectory. So if we look at Miles's story, right, he was getting mentored at that moment, right? Peter B. Parker was teaching him how to be Spider-Man, right, in that moment. So they just threw a bagel and kept moving, right? And that started something that now they're both having to deal with.
But in reality, it started with that scientist who, working for Kingpin, pulled the spider out. And it's like, he had no idea that this spider was the spider that was going to create a Spider-Man in that universe.
I have a question. Thank you for going to this discussion. I have a question now.
Yeah.
He pulled the 42 spider out of someone else's universe into the Peter B. Parker universe.
Into the one that the Spider-Man that dies in the first movie. Okay,
so not okay. So Peter B. Parker is another universe. In Miles Morales' universe, he loses his Peter Parker. That is the universe that his scientist brings. He takes the spider and brings it into Miles' universe.
Right, because the other Peter B. Parker is expecting Doc Ock to be a man, and instead it's a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yes. Okay,
had that scientist not brought that spider, which is also one of the big points that Miguel brings up,
yes.
Miles would have gotten his powers. There would the likelihood that
yes.
that other universe's Peter would have been bitten by that spider.
Yes, that makes sense. That part makes sense. I was just asking about the Spot, right? So he is the scientist that took the 42 spider out of the 42 universe and put it in Miles's universe.
And he is the one who is working on the collider.
Yes.
That Kingpin was using that destabilized all the universal walls. Correct.
Yes.
So really, because of that standpoint, is like it's not Miles didn't really create him; he created himself by performing that experiment, which is the continual standpoint of you don't know what's going to happen with these circumstances, how they're going to propagate in the ripples, and that's also something as we as therapists also deal with in the standpoint. We work with a client, especially say one that was in school and so forth. And we, at the end of the school year, have to say goodbye to them because we're moving on, they're moving on. And we have no idea what type of ripple effect that has happened with their lives.
I agree with you on that. And I kind of love that tie-in, because what I was doing, as you were kind of giving me another understanding of that trajectory, that origin, I was actually thinking exactly where you took us to, which is this is a lot of what we do with our clients, which is they come in and they give us kind of where they are at that moment. We work with them, not knowing kind of what happened before. And like you said, at the end of whatever it is, not always knowing what's going to happen next and hoping that whatever chunk we've given them will support them moving forward. And so I was thinking about how for this person, that's kind of what he keeps wanting, support. He wants to be acknowledged. He wants people to understand that he's a great scientist, that he knows what he's doing. Like just all of his motivations feel very much like working with someone through treatment, right? Helping them understand who they are, helping them understand what they're doing, even helping them understand their own motivations for why they want to be this person, why they want to be who they are. And so you're giving me the whole trajectory and me actually understanding where in this story, the Spot kind of does have his moment of kind of turning. I realized, wow, it wasn't the bagel. So thank you, because that was my trajectory. I was like, oh, there was another trajectory here that I was missing. So thank you.
And he's also dealing with the issue of isolation as well, too.
Yes.
So that is for all of these characters, even their villain, there is an issue of isolation.
Yeah. And what that does, how that creates this black hole that he ends up kind of becoming, right? This huge, he just kind of, metaphorically kind of goes into himself, which
he accidentally does, which sets so much more of this off in sequence. So there's so much a metaphor for dealing with mental health and depression, loneliness.
Yes.
At the very core of all of this.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I'm sitting with that. Because I mean, again, if you've seen it, that whole scene as he notices that he's going into himself and has lost all of this and has no ground really is what I was noticing. And, as a therapist, you're watching it as a nerd, but you're also like, oh man, somebody help him. Right? It's like you notice that he's getting to this place where it's like, he has no ground. I don't know where I am anymore in this universe. He pokes his head through like a real universe and is like, where am I? He just kind of gets lost. And when you're talking about that metaphor for mental and emotional kind of wellness in that journey, that's how it can feel sometimes. Like you just get really lost and you have no ground, right? Where is it? Where do I find my footing? Where do I find who I am? Where do I find just me? And so realizing that at the end for the Spot where he is this black hole, right? Kind of this there's no beginning or end to him. And so how does he find his way back, whatever that looks like? But it's paralleled with Miles, who's also not in a black hole, but somewhere else. And it's like, how does he find his way back? Right? How does he figure out how to get back to his home universe, his home people, right? I just really appreciate that metaphor that we end the movie with in terms of what happens with our mental and emotional wellness when we get so lost. We don't know who we are anymore. We don't know what that is for both the villain and the hero. If we're doing that gray area, neither of them are in a great place at the end of it. They're both very lost, so to speak. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. And I think that's a good place to let all of our listeners sort of take a moment and sink in on all of that and start figuring out where they are when they're sitting in that black spot of themselves and what they're seeing here. So stay tuned. We'll be back for the second half as we continue our discussion of Miles Morales Across the Spider-Verse. Here on Untying Knots, I'm Perry Clark, and I'm here with Mercedes Samudio. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Enjoying our shows and can't get enough of us? Follow us on Instagram at Voice America Talk Radio and see what we're cooking up for you.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Welcome back, folks, to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Mercedes Samudio, licensed clinical social worker, and we're discussing in our blurredom, as well as our professionalisms, about the recent Spider-Man movie Across the Spider-Verse, which focuses on the Spider-Man, or Spider-Person, of Miles Morales. So, piggybacking off what I was saying earlier about what we do with being counselors in school and so forth, one of the things that comes in there is also his meeting with the guidance counselor at his school. And there's a very significant moment as everyone's racing, as both father and son in their own way are racing off to go deal with the spot. The guidance counselor says to the mom, he's lying to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I heard that whole scene. I think is actually really good because, again, we're talking about the guidance counselor. She mentions a lot about who Miles is to them, right? They're like, oh, very aware. But I love what you said, that as all of the commotion is over and the mom is just kind of there contemplating, that both her son and her husband have just kind of left her there, at this guidance counselor meeting, that for her to say he's lying to you. She does not stipulate who. Right? They both use he, him. They both kind of are cis-identified. So it's he's lying to you. And I kind of appreciate who, which one of them, right? Which one of them is lying? Who is it telling the truth about their commitment level or where they are, their presence or their ability to stay there, or their discomfort, right? And so I like that because it opens up even more discussion about representation. Who do you think the guidance counselor is talking about, right? Is it the dad who is kind of dealing with his own identity stuff and managing his stuff as a dad, as a cop, and as a father, and as a husband? But then also you've got actual Miles Morales, who is Spider-Man, who literally is not telling his parents what's going on, right? And I just appreciate that because it doesn't decide for the audience or even for the character, the mom, what's going on. It's just something to be aware of. He's lying to you, right? Bring that awareness up for you.
I think there is a point where she says your son is lying to you. But
all right, I'll give it to you. I was going off on my own.
No. I think you're right too, because until the guidance counselor provides that clarification, even the mom is wondering just that. But the thing is, it's also true about the husband, even if the guidance counselor is immediately only talking about Miles. They're both not telling the truth.
Right. And I think we talked about it in the first half. That leads them to having that discussion when they're on the balcony, whatever, trying to deal with the spot that Miles, as Spider-Man, is talking to his dad, like, ease up. But then the dad is talking about, well, like, it's hard. I'm trying to be a good dad. I'm trying to make sure he's okay. You know, so it's like, I just kind of appreciate that. Again, I want to bring up that vulnerability, right? That vulnerability in these two men, right? One's a younger man, one's an older man. They both identify as Black. In their pieces of their identity, that they're struggling with. How do we manage this? How do I manage this young man who's growing up in front of me? How does he, as a dad, even manage his own life stuff? He gets promoted in the movie. He's dealing with what that means to have to deal with, that level of responsibility. And so I just appreciate that these discussions are happening, and they're happening as part of the story. We're not having a very special moment, it's actually happening. And so, not to get away from the guidance counselor piece, I like that, right? I like that the guidance counselors, hey, wake up, like, something's happening, pay attention, someone's lying to you here. But then when the two young men, or when the two men get to each other, they also are kind of playing a bit of a dance, right? Like, he's obviously not telling his dad is obviously not going to share, but there's a lot of this, I want to say lying, even though that's the word that the guidance counselor uses, but I think there's a lot of, how do I navigate this relationship, this dynamic? And so everyone is doing that by kind of hiding behind what everyone else thinks. You think I'm going to school every day. You think I'm doing good at the job. You think I'm a great mom who's doing everything and keeping it together, right? Everyone thinks the other one's okay. Yeah, they're fine.
Which also allows us to flip into that when we see what happens with Gwen and her father.
Yeah, where there's that, everything is not okay in that relationship.
Which they're dealing with the aspect of, in Gwen's universe, Peter became the lizard and died. Compared to what happens in Peter's universe, where Lizard keeps getting resurrected as Dr. Connors. But this aspect, but the biggest thing that comes up with him is the aspect, and adds to her sense of being alone. She can't tell her dad she's Spider-Woman or Spider-Gwen, as we know her.
Yeah. And how that wrecks their kind of relationship too, right? That not being able to talk about things. I would even say with this dad, he also has a level of discomfort because he gets very preoccupied with finding the guy who hurt. He knew this kid. He knew Peter. He knew who this young man was. He didn't know what ended up happening and all that, or how all that happened. But he knew that they were close. He used to eat dinner with them. He used to be part of their family, right? And so the dad gets preoccupied with trying to solve that crime. Obviously has no idea that his daughter is the vigilante that he thinks has done it, right? And kind of how that masking or that hiding affects this family, right? And what happens there.
And in many ways, he's kind of the, let's call it the shadow to Miguel. They're so wrapped up in that aspect of Miguel's got to make up for what happened when he popped universes. And Gwen's dad has got to be so aspect of he's got to get justice, what he believes is justice, for this kid that was so much like his own son.
Yeah.
And we can even just briefly touch on that one. The reason Peter was so willing to take the lizard formula was because he was dealing with being bullied.
Yeah. Oof. The depth of that.
And its own correlations to what we've seen with, sadly, mass school shootings by students who have been bullied by their peers, by their teachers, by the entire educational system as it is. Yeah.
And I appreciate that aspect too, because again, I think it just links to what we were talking about in the second half, that in this movie and in a lot of our newer comic book spaces, we're looking at villains not being these just bad guys. Like, he wasn't a bad guy. He was really trying to protect himself and survive. Right. And then we look at all of these kind of other decisions, like even the decisions that the dad makes. He's not a bad guy. He's looking for justice. Right. And then even the decisions that Gwen ends up making. She's not like a troubled teenager. She's really trying to actually help. Right. And but then you realize here that there's that gray. There's no right or wrong here. Everyone really is doing what they think is the best thing to do here. And I appreciate that juxtaposition, if you will, with Miles, because even in their relationship, Gwen spends a lot of time away from him because he seems to have the family and the friends and the this and the that, right? And so I even realized that in their relationship, their masking keeps them from being able to be honest with each other because she feels like he's better off and doesn't need all of this trauma and her life is horrible, where he is like, no, like, I want to be a part of this. You know, why does everyone think I'm so great? I can be strong, right? I can help with everybody. And so I just appreciate these constant reminders that, like, when we're not being authentic, when we're not being honest, when we're not communicating, look at how much happens, right? Because someone thinks that's what happened. And I know for a fact, certainly this is what's going on, right? When we look at our clients and when we're working through mental health, I would even say mental wellness, it's like, yeah, when we're not communicating or showing up as our best selves, lots of things get lost in translation. Lots of things, right? And that's I think reflected in all of these examples that we keep bringing up with the spider people and their decisions.
Well, and to the fact that Gwen is repeating the same decision she made with her universe's Peter, with withholding and not recognizing what's going on with Miles, and why a decision such that you've brought to him, which, let's be frank, is a giant hero's dilemma, as opposed to the smaller classic one of rescue the people in the tram or save this individual over here, rescue the tram or save that individual. It's still the same thing of, is Miles going to save the individual that is dead or save the entire Spider-Verse, which is made up of all these other people, the good of the one versus the good of the many. And that is, I would say at its core, is the hero's dilemma. And so that came up in the standpoint of, oh yeah, you've got another canon event going on. It's just the scale is so large, your sensors aren't tripping.
Right. And I think that's a really great metaphor for how we kind of navigate our world, that we're really just kind of looking at these really small events and not realizing that there's some bigger kind of things going on here. As you were sharing that, and I was thinking, like, we're not paying attention to these bigger issues. We're not paying attention to, a lot of times it is very small, right? Like, am I going to do this? Or am I going to do this? Right. I was also thinking, as we're talking about mental and emotional wellness, developmentally, how old these kids are, right? So not Miguel, but you think about teenagers and how their ideas are very self-centered. They're kind of into themselves, right? That's exactly the type of decisions that Gwen, Miles, right, are making, right? But interestingly enough, it ends up being the type of decision most spider people make, because when they get bit, they're usually teenagers. Right. They don't get bit in their 20s and their 30s. They get bit as teenagers. And so even the Miguels and the Jessicas and the Peter B. Parkers that are older, he's still, like, they're all still making very adolescent identity-based decisions on, who am I? Should I be doing this? And so I think it's an interesting metaphor here when we're looking at mental and emotional wellness, and how we might be a certain age, but developmentally, the way we might be coming into our decision-making or our reactions might be reflective of another age. And that's something I'm noticing with all the spider people. The teenagers and some of the older ones still tend to act very recklessly, selfishly, kind of
the class clowns.
Yes, right. They want to be funny. They want to be, very everyman. And I think it's just an interesting thing that you brought up, that it's like, like, there's all these events that no one's paying attention to because everyone is focused on them. I'm lonely. My universe is whoever. And then are we looking at, well, yes, it's your universe is whoever, but it's also versus something that's a little bit bigger. Has anyone paid attention to that? But none of them do, not even Miguel. Like you said, like, his decision is why we're here, right? That kind of selfish decision. And so I just think that's an interesting thing to pay attention to when we're looking at how does this be reflective of how we show up in our own mental and emotional world. Well, right? Developmentally, oftentimes we might be reflecting another part of ourselves that's not reflective of our age or our situation, because that's a pretty traumatic thing to get bitten as a teenager and then have all that responsibility foisted upon you.
And the metamorphic change, which leads so much into the other issue that also is cornerstone of what we see with Gwen's story, is that aspect of, in relationship with her father, is the aspect of, oh, you lied to me.
Yes.
And even more so that sense of that dual identity, which is also another one of the classic tropes of superheroes, is the character having the dual identity. And I think Batman is one of the best examples of dealing with that identity standpoint, aside from the other issues Batman has, with that standpoint of, he thinks of himself always as Batman, and Bruce Wayne is the cover identity. While flip that, Superman Kal-El is his true identity. Clark is his cover identity.
Right.
And how do they both either stay separate and reflect those two different things about the choices they get to make, or how do they merge together? And how is that merge working, or actually still hitting that developmental issues?
Yeah. And even looking at, for those two characters, a lot of their trauma happened when they were young. And so that dual identity is also another way for them to stay safe, right? And so I still feel like, we're in that developmental space of like, I wonder, so you have someone like Bruce Wayne who loses his parents and decides to hide behind the Batman of it, because that's healthy. I can do something with that, right? You have Kal-El who loses his whole planet and is the epitome of being alone, right? And, again, barring all the other conversations about cousins and people that show up later on, but for all intents and purposes, right? He's the only Kryptonian, right? And so Clark Kent allows him to actually be a human. It allows him to actually not be isolated, right? Whereas for Bruce Wayne, Batman allows him to be more himself, right? And so I think that's an interesting thing, that for both of these characters, and I think similar characters that have trauma in their childhood, they pick identities that make them feel either more like they can do something or like they can be part of something, right? Superman has to be Clark so he can't walk around as Superman all day. No one will, they'll just kind of always see him as a hero. But if he puts his glasses on and he goes to work as a journalist, he can just be everybody. He can just be part of the world. Right. Whereas Batman's like, I don't want to do that. And we
got a glimpse of that when Miles goes to get the cakes.
Ooh, yeah.
He went to get the cakes dressed as Spider-Man. Would the same number of things, because they show all the things that delay him from getting to the party because he's being Spider-Man. Now, if he'd been in quote unquote Miles mode, would he have stopped to deal with the same number of things? He would have been also caught up with that, again, hero's dilemma, the family and the good of that versus stopping the street level crime or running into the various things that are going on.
Which is a very adolescent dilemma, right? If you look at it, adolescents are still trying to figure out who they are. So for him, what do I choose? And for adolescents, I'll be honest with you, for teens, they also think a lot of times they can do it all. And so for him, he's also thinking, I can go to school, I can be Spider-Man, I can get to the party. Because in his mind, he's Spider-Man. I can just fling around, right? I can just fling around all of, New York and get everything that I need. And so he's not even aware of the fact that with all of your abilities, you still have to understand how to prioritize. You still have to understand how to organize. You still have to pay attention to time. So you can hit that crime, but that takes you 5 blocks away from everything. You also
in the opposite direction.
Right. And so it's like he's not paying attention to that. Right. And so as you think about adolescence, as you think about development, right, you have these characters who become superheroes when they're not fully able to understand the magnitude of their decisions. Right. So they just jump in thinking, I'm Spider-Man, or I've got all the gadgets, I'm Batman, or I can fly, so I'm Superman. They're not developed enough to think about what is the bigger picture here. If I do zoom in and do this, what happens, right? So if we're looking at Miles Morales in this scene, he hasn't thought all about all of these crimes that I'm stopping. That's time, right? Also, I'm holding cakes that are fragile, so I'm also bopping them around, the whole time. And so when he finally gets there, not only is he late, but the cakes are all destroyed. Whatever icing and
whatever
words
message
scattered are gone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's over because as a teenager, even with all his superpower, he doesn't understand what is going on, how to manage all of that responsibility, how to manage all of that power.
Which I would say also on the flip side, Miguel, Jessica, Peter B. Parker also are struggling with the flip side of that, even though they're adults. I mean, that even the aspect of when he has a conversation with Mary Jane about, you brought our baby to a chase.
Right. Again, like this is not the first time. Right. Right. And then we see Jessica Drew, she's literally pregnant. Right. And I'm not saying you should not do your thing, but it's like, okay, where are priorities? Like, where are we in our mindset? Not thinking that as a spider person, you could do everything, but should you? Right.
Exactly.
And so, yes, you could always get that next crime or get that next mission, but is this important? Is this the right idea here? And I won't even go into right or right, because I kind of like the gray area that spider people tend to stay in, because that's why I think if we go back to just canon events, I think this is why they happen. It's like spider people are constantly in this idea of what's priority, what's priority, what's priority, right? What's priority? And when they make the decision that is this, then we get this canon event. Uncle Ben passes, right? Or when they make a decision as this, then we get this canon event, right? This Spider-Man becomes the Prowler instead, or this Miles becomes the Prowler instead.
Or they get cloned.
Or they get cloned, right? And so when you look at all these spider people, you got the teenage ones or the adolescent ones kind of making the same type of reckless decisions that the older ones do, because they're all spider people. They all have this sense of, I can do that thing. I can do that mission, or I can hit that next crime and still be home for dinner. Still, make sure Mayday gets to bed on time. Still get my parents' cake for the for the, promotion party. They all have that same idea that I can do this without the awareness of, should I do this? Is this the right time to do this? Is this the right opportunity to do this? And I think that's something that we see throughout their decisions as spider people, especially when they're all together.
And they all go chasing after him, leaving him able to get back into the base.
Which brings another question to Miles, that he is obviously, because he's not like all the other spider people, he's able to kind of exploit that, exploit that desire for spider people to go after one thing, right? He's able to exploit that flaw in a spider person's motivations.
Well, that's all. Going back to the MCU, there was one of the things that was also talked about that was suggested with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, is that he's also mimicking a lot of the qualities that would happen with neurodiverse individuals, that ability sometimes to hyperfixate.
That's an interesting thing, and I kind of appreciate that, because I think that is a spider person's mindset, because they have these abilities. They believe that I can fix this, right? And so if you think about No Way Home, that's his whole thing. I can fix this. I can fix each of these people and get them back to their universe, right? No matter what everyone else is saying, right? This Miles feels the same way, right? I can do this. I can fix this. I can save my dad and not make it a canon event or not, right? That's the big scale that you were talking about at the top. But then we also think about what you just said, right? That this is kind of part of what it looks like to exist in the world sometimes, right? That sometimes we do have this, right? So if you are on the spectrum, that's part of who you are, right? But I think that's just part of who we are as people, right? That we do sometimes get so fixated on our jobs, on our hobbies, on our parenting, that we kind of miss these bigger pieces of whatever's going on.
Or the next achievement.
Yes. Or we even miss that things might be okay right now and nothing needs to be happening. Like we've actually gotten to a space of equilibrium, that nothing needs to be moved right now.
Well, especially when we have those, and we see it especially with our clients who are always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
They can't, if everything's actually going well, they're constantly looking for something to go wrong. And that hypervigilance, therefore, whatever it is that's going to go wrong, to the point where they will even create what will go wrong.
Mm.
Becoming the villain of their own story, even for just a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that we see reflected here in Spider People's kind of own thing, that they are so fixated on fixing whatever it is, the canon event, the universe, that they end up becoming their own villains. Right? They end up becoming their own saboteur, if you will. Right? Gwen is so fixated on one thing that she misses her friends bullying. She misses what's going on. Then this happens. And it's kind of like, yeah, so you were like living this double life and you missed something that you actually could have been a part of or could have supported. Right. And I think that's something that, if we're talking about clients and where they are in our mental health journey, that's often what mental health becomes, this ability to sit with what's going on and not feel like you got to do the next thing. Right. So I have gotten to the end of it. Instead of saying, what's next? Really kind of sitting. Can I sit? And what does that feel like to sit there? Right. And I think that's that mental health journey that we see with people. But I also think that's what happens with Spider people. They have a very hard time sitting in, I can't fix this, or this needs more support. Right. They often get dinged from people by saying, you didn't ask for support. You didn't ask for support. You didn't ask for support, because they rush into things by themselves. And oftentimes I talk to clients about that, where I talk about like, yeah, this is something that you've done, but you weren't by yourself, right? You weren't in the vacuum. There's a larger, thing here, even if it's society, right? That's around you, right? It's a bigger kind of space. And so to bring me back to kind of this idea that I think oftentimes Spider people, right, often feel like they've got to fix it, which starts this whole chain of events because they have a hard time sitting with, where am I right now? Is it fixed? Can I fix it? Should I fix it? And I think our clients get caught in that cycle too. Oftentimes, well, okay, everything's fine. And you're like, right, so let's sit and everything's fine. Well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And then they're off to the races with, well, what if that happens? Right. And I think that's what we see with Spider people. Well, I can fix it. What if? Instead of sitting with, I think we're fine right now. Right. What's going on here?
Well, I even laughed there as you said, what if, which is the entire Marvel's alternate universe storyline compared to elsewhere in DC.
Yes. What if?
Which I think that's a lovely segue into the other major character we see here, who I think actually is probably a counter to everything we've been talking about, is Hobie.
Yeah.
Spider-Punk.
Yeah. I think he might have been my favorite newest Spider person introduced here because number one, I love Daniel Kaluuya. He can do no wrong. I love him. But I love his whole Spider-Punk's whole, middle finger to the system approach to life, right? I really appreciate him because I think you're right. He goes against all of that, right? All of that. No matter what someone says, he's always like, yeah, hyping him up, go for it, do it, break the system. Don't worry about what's going on. See what's different. And I like that because I feel like in whatever kind of cycle this is, you always need someone who's the catalyst. You need someone who says, do something different. Don't keep doing the same thing. Break out of the cycle. And I feel like that's what Spider-Punk continues to do. From the moment he shows up, even as he's mentioned, he starts to mess up things, right? Because once Miles realized that Gwen was hanging out with him, Hobie, who's this Hobie? Who's Hobie? Right? We spent the whole movie realizing that Hobie is this kind of sore. What's the euphemism? He's kind of this thorn in everybody's side already, right? Like he's already there before we meet him, messing up the relationship between Miles and Gwen. He's already kind of like this mysterious character. Who's Hobie? And then you meet
that everybody loves.
Yeah. Who is this guy? Like, who is he? And then you meet him and you do love him because he's really about get away from this stuff. Nothing that they're saying is they're telling you the truth. Think for yourself. Kind of be what I think Miles already is. But I think Spider-Punk is giving him permission to be like, yeah, ask questions, man. You're doing the right thing. See what's going on. Poke a little bit. Right. Even the fact that he gave them the wristband to go back and get him out of his universe. Right. He's like, I'm not in it anymore. I'm out of it. I got kicked out of it because I won't follow the rules. But here's my wristband. You can go ahead and do it. And so I love his character. for that, for the reason that we've been talking about. I think we've been talking a lot about cycles and how things kind of never get to an end because we don't know how to end it. And then you've got a character here who keeps saying, break the system, poke a hole at something. Yeah, don't keep doing the same thing, right? He's just saying that every time he's talking, that's pretty much what he's saying. And so I really appreciate that character to what we've been sharing, because I think those type of characters, interestingly enough, I know this might be very self-praise here, but I think therapists kind of become the hobies to a lot of our clients, right? We encourage them to break those narratives that they keep repeating. We encourage them to look at a cycle that's repeating to see if they still want it to be that way, right? We kind of give them their own wristbands so they get to do the things that they want to do. And so that's why I think I connect with this character, because I think as therapists on people's mental health journeys, that's what we're doing. We're saying, look at this a little bit differently, right? Do you want this cycle to keep going? Is this the narrative you want to keep playing in your head? Right. And I feel like we kind of get to be spider punks to our clients, right? We get to support them in being like, think about this, sit here with this before you decide again, right? We mentioned sometimes our clients can feel like they're going to go back and do it. Well, we get to be hoping. We get to say, are you sure you'd like to do that again? Think about that. We've done this before, right? We've seen this before, right? What else would you like to do instead? And so that's one of the reasons why I like him, because he's doing that to the spider people. He's one of the few spider people that are like, you don't really have to do this. You can do something else.
Which is also what Miles is saying. He's like, there are some other choices. And because of who he is, there will be other choices that he gets to take that others won't. Although I think also there's a way that they're underselling Hobie's ability. I'm not going to say it's predicting, but his inability to recognize that that he's actually thinking a couple of steps ahead. He knew to go and drop his band off for Gwen to use, that he could see what Gwen would actually do when actually given that other choice. Yeah.
I might even say, can he see, or does he just kind of being that devil's advocate, for lack of a better term, he kind of just wants to be that catalyst, so to speak, right? Like if I just say, I feel like a lot of times he'll just say, you'll agree with someone in the scene just so that way they'll continue on with whatever their speech is. Like, yeah, go for it, brother. Like keep going, And so I feel like a lot of times he becomes like a catalyst, so to speak. So like in what you're sharing, I think he can see that if I do something, if I set a spark, if I do something, they will have to make a different decision, right? That they'll have to do something different. If I leave them this wristband, they'll have to make a different decision. If I support this person or say, yes, speak up, they'll make a different decision. He kind of keeps being that catalyst. He let Gwen stay with him, right? When she was kind of not figuring out where she was, she was like, hey, he was like, yeah, come stay with me. Figure yourself out, right? And so I kind of appreciate that he is this catalyst for these spider people. He keeps just kind of egging them on or agreeing with them or giving them permission to say what they want to say.
Oh, yeah. Well, even too, when he reminds Miles is like, use your full palm.
Right. So he can use his full power, not just a little bit of it, the fullness of his power.
Which then let's also just touch slightly on the aspect of what is punk culture, and what was it a reaction, or how it came into existence in our histories and so forth. And when I think about punk, I know most talk about the music and so forth, but for me, it's more cyberpunk. So I go much more to like Blade Runner and so forth when I think of punk, as opposed to the music, the plaid and the mohawks and all of that. But that's in the standpoint of breaking against this sort of structured system that's going to keep feeding in on itself, that's going to keep maintaining itself to stay at a status quo that doesn't allow anything to grow and change.
Yeah,
that doesn't allow for
I love that.
Chaos. Well, not so much chaos, but that potential. Because I know there's one thing I've often said to clients: fear is there to keep us safe, but it can also keep us from growing.
Yeah. And I think what you talk about, that punk culture, is that catalyst to say there's something else. Look deeper. Don't just accept, right, what's there. Ask questions, right? And so I think it's an interesting thing that you took it there too, from that music aspect. Because I definitely think about music, right? But then there's also a whole culture, right? So again, beyond the music or the aesthetics of it, there is this whole idea of questioning, asking more questions, diving deeper, maybe looking at, are these cycles still working? And if not, why are we still going along with it then? Right. And so he becomes that voice throughout the movie, right? Where it's like, speak up, or he just kind of agrees with whoever is going against the establishment, right? If someone's like, well, I don't want to do this, he's like, yeah, me neither, right? And he goes along with it. He's just kind of always there to be that catalyst, if you want, be that kind of push. Yeah, speak up. Yeah, ask another question. Yeah, why is that? Right? Even, like I said, we keep going back to it, but even the fact that he had this idea to make sure that they have a way to get him, right? To be able to hop universes, because he gets kicked out. Or I think he quits. I forget. I think he just goes in and quits because he's like, he quits, right? Because he's like, I don't want to keep doing this, whatever this is. And I appreciate that, because that is, I think, exactly what punk culture is. It's what that whole establishment is. It's like, it's against whatever the system is, especially if that system is broken or if that system is exclusive, right? And it's keeping people out, and it's keeping people from being able to be a part of that system.
Which the entire spider society, let's just go call it that Miguel's built, is this aspect of everyone's in there except for Miles.
Except for Miles.
They even let Hobie in, but they were going to keep Miles out as being the anomaly, as being the thing that was so different that they couldn't let him in, even though the one who, again, not because he chose to do something, someone else chose to do something, and he dealt with the reaction to it, or which put him in the right place in the right time for a second Spider-Man to exist in that universe.
And interestingly enough, that sounds like gatekeeping.
Which has also been one of the most difficult things we have, as you and I know, as Blerds, have dealt with the aspect of the gatekeeping in our fandoms.
Yes. Ooh, yes. Yeah. So it's very reminiscent of that. I think that, like, if you think about how Miles gets kicked out, even not kicked out, but even in the first movie, he has to fight to get into the little spider group where they're like, no, you're not ready. No, you're not ready yet. You know? And so it's like this kind of gatekeeping in the Spider-Verse, right? Of who makes the right Spider-Man, who gets to be Spider-Man, right? Even, and you mentioned it, right? That even this Miles in his universe wasn't supposed to be Spider-Man. He already had a Spider-Man, right? There was already a Spider-Man there. Unfortunately, that Spider-Man did pass, but there was already one there. And so the fact that he even became a Spider-Man was an anomaly. Right, he wasn't really supposed to be a Spider-Man, and so now that he's part of the Spider Society, the Spider-Verse, right? Watching this gatekeeping of, you weren't supposed to be here. Why did you bring him? All the hoops that Gwen goes through to try to get him in and try to even get him, established as it. It'll be interesting to see how they discuss that and why he's such an anomaly. Why there's all this gatekeeping, so to speak, about his particular Spider-Person not being a part of it, which we see for clients a lot.
Oh, yes, we definitely see that. And especially when it also means that they'll end up having to put distance between structures that that have been identity building, like some cases, you have to put some distance between toxic family members. Not because you don't want to, not because you don't love them, but that toxicity poisons everything.
Right. Yes. And I think that's what we're seeing, right? That idea of, like, when people are that toxic, it kind of messes up the whole spider group, right? That just that one person who decides, right, Miguel, no, this is how it's going to go. It becomes really toxic in there, right? Like, so much so you've got this faction who now has to break off to do something about it. Right? They have to literally break off. And I love that the ones from the first one, you got Spider-Noir, come back, Spider-Ham, right? These Penny Parker, right? These spider people now have to break off from whatever this established spider society system is now that's become really toxic because of how Miguel leads it.
And the addition of the new ones with Spider Bite, our Indian Spider-Man, which I'd love to give him a different name than just Indian Spider-Man. Right. But that standpoint of just having these other places and where it goes.
Yeah.
So we're definitely going to have to come back after when we get the second half of this and see what's going on. And as we pick and find the other mental health components there.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a place where I think it's about time for us to wrap up for this episode.
Sounds good to me.
Likewise. So stay tuned for our part 2 when the next movie comes out. And enjoy your fantasy, enjoy your science fiction, be the best Blerd, be the best. I'm not even going to try and start figuring out what it would mean for you to be a Latino nerd. I'm not going to figure out what it means for you to be a Middle Eastern nerd, but you get the idea. You got your term, find it, take it, live with it. And we're also here in solidarity of let's just enjoy the experience. So, Mercedes, till next time.
See you, everybody.
All right, bye.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.